Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to the first Vale Morgan Cabinet meeting of the new administration, which is taking place today on the 9th of June 2022. I'm Councillor Liz Burnett and I'm chair of the meeting as the leader of the Vale Morgan Council and Cabinet member for Performance and Resources. I would like to introduce my fellow Cabinet members, who are Councillor Bronwyn Brooks, Deputy Leader and Cabinet Member for Sustainable Places, Councillor Rhiannon Birch, Cabinet Member for Education, Arts and the Welsh Language, Councillor Mark Wilson, Cabinet Member for Neighbourhood and Building Services, Councillor Margaret Wilkinson, Cabinet Member for Public Sector Housing and Tenant Engagement, Councillor Eddie Williams, Cabinet Member for Social Care and Health, Councillor Ruba Sivanyanam, Cabinet Member for Community Engagement, Equalities and Regulatory Services, and Councillor Gwyn John, Cabinet Member for Leisure, Sport and Wellbeing. May I remind members and officers that the meeting is being live streamed, recorded and will be uploaded to the Vale of Glamorgan Council's website as soon as practicable after the meeting. So without further ado, we'll move on to the agenda for today. And the first item on the agenda, agenda item 1, is apologies for absence. And looking around, I can see that we don't have any apologies for today. Margaret, you wanted to make a comment?
I am here at the moment, shall we say, but I have another important meeting at 3 o'clock at the Colquitt School. It's to sign off the accounts, a finance meeting, and I have to be there because otherwise there won't be enough people. So I'll be leaving at 10 to 3. Thank you very much. Thank you
for letting us know. Next item on the agenda is the minutes of the last meeting, and as that was the last meeting of the last administration, only myself, Councillor Wilkinson and Councillor Williams were actually present at that. So if I can move those as a correct record, do I have a second?
And I will second them.
Super, thank you. Agenda item 3 is to receive declarations of interest. Do we have any today? Bronwyn.
Yes, just declaring an interest in item number 10, which is the Strong Communities Grant Fund. Received dispensation. It's because I'm the leader of Barry Town Council as well, so it's a personal but it's not prejudicial. So I'll be able to take part and vote in the meeting as well.
Thank you. Councillor Wilkinson, Wilson next, I think. You're muted, Mark.
Thank you very much, Leader. Yes, on the same item as Councillor Brooks, I haven't got dispensation, but I'm a member of Penarth Town Council in relation to the report concerning Support Strong Communities Grant Fund, agenda item 10.
Thank you. Councillor John Gwyn.
And the same applies for me as I'm a member of Lantern Major Town Council. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Williams.
Thank you, Chair. I'm the same. I'm a member of Lantern Town Council. I've got dispensation, so but a non-prejudicial interest. Thank you.
Super. And finally, I think Councillor Birch.
The same as Mark Wilson, member of Penarth Town Council, and obviously this may come into play with the Strong Communities Grant Fund. I've applied for dispensation but not yet had it granted.
Super. Councillor Wilkinson, you've got your hand up.
Similar, I am a town councillor and I have applied and I haven't had an answer yet, but similar on item 10. Yeah,
I've seen the advice from the monitoring officer that that there is similar to what Eddie said, is that there is no you can declare a personal interest, but actually that you can remain and stay within the meeting. And in fact, the monitoring officer has her hand up, so she
yes,
can provide clarification.
Absolutely. Just to clarify and to concur with your comment, Leader, and for the accuracy of the minutes, with regards to those members who have declared the interest, it is a personal interest, not prejudicial given the nature of the report. On the issue of dispensation, as Councillor Birch pointed out, applications are coming in, but they haven't been considered by Standards Committee at this stage. But for this particular report, because of the nature, in fact, it wouldn't strictly require a dispensation because it is non-prejudicial. So hopefully that just clarifies the point for the minutes. Thank you.
Super. And I have to declare an interest under agenda item 7, which is, and this is a complicated one, which is why I left it to last, is a personal prejudicial interest, as I have lasting power of attorney for a parent's affairs, which includes arranging payments for things like telecare, domiciliary services, etc., etc. So some of the issues that are mentioned under agenda item 7, discretionary cost of living scheme, would apply. However, I have been granted dispensation to speak, vote and remain in meetings where issues are raised in respect of the council's telecare services, domiciliary care provision, etc., etc., as is mentioned in agenda item 7, and that's been granted, and I will fill in the necessary forms. So thank you all. Let's go find the next agenda item. So if we move on to agenda item 4, this is actually, to a certain extent, slight housekeeping. It's to gain Cabinet's approval to continue with an existing policy in relation to discretionary council tax reduction. But as we say that we will review it at regular periods, that is actually why it's before us. And so Cabinet are looking to reaffirm the current policy, and it's granted under section 13(1)(c) of the Local Government Finance Act 1992. And it's to do with where existing legislation doesn't cover the situation or potential discounts on council tax are insufficient or there are exceptional circumstances. So to go into it in slightly more detail, the Local Government Finance Act 1992 provides the council with the discretion to reduce liability for council tax in relation to individual cases or classes of cases that it may determine. And this is, as I said, it's an existing policy where the council, which the council reviews on a regular basis, and that's why we're here. The cost of awarding council tax reductions have got to be funded from within the total income generated by council tax. It sounds a bit complicated, but there is a limit to how much we can spend on such reductions. And as a consequence, the council will only consider using its powers to reduce council tax liability for any council tax payer or class of payer in exceptional circumstances. So this is to people facing very serious hardship. Since the introduction of the policy in 2019, the overall cost of awarding discounts under this policy has remained within the anticipated maximum expenditure of 15,000 a year. So an important amount, but not a massive amount. It's for, as I said, the most exceptional circumstances. The continuation of the policy obviously has a positive impact for people who find themselves in severe difficulties and crisis situations. And there are two main qualifying conditions within the policy. One is exceptional financial hardship. And the council tax reduction scheme in operation at the Vale already considers both the financial and specific circumstances of individuals. However, this doesn't exclude people from also applying under this policy. What we do expect is for residents to have claimed any discounts that they're entitled to before they get to this sort of end of the roads sort of policy. It's also eligible for crisis situations, so fire and flood. So if people find themselves in those, and the council will consider requests for assistance from customers who, no fault of their own, have experienced a crisis or event that's made their dwelling uninhabitable, where they would remain liable to pay council tax because their furniture and stuff might still be in the premises. Applications are considered within the Exchequer team, that's part of the finance team, by senior officers, and we also then have an appeal process in place if a decision is challenged. The policy itself is quite clear in terms of eligibility, etc., and that's all set out at Appendix A. And as I said, the eligibility is under Section 3 of that appendix. So the recommendations, we've got 4 recommendations before us today, fairly straightforward. And that's firstly that Cabinet reaffirms the current process for awarding discretionary relief in accordance with the discretionary council tax reduction policy as attached to Appendix A to this report in relation to any valid application received and accepted by the council. The discretionary council tax reduction will only be awarded after all the other discounts, exemptions and mandatory council tax reduction has been awarded. 3, that the award will commence from the date the application is received, and any backdated period will be considered depending on the merits of each individual application. So it would be from when it's received, and it also, we could look at it going backwards if necessary. That delegated authority is granted to the head of finance / 151 officer in consultation with the leader and cabinet member for performance and resources to review the policy every 2 years, and only report to cabinet where any future changes are required. And I would so move.
And I'll second that, Leader.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Super. And we'll move on then to agenda item 5, and that is the Q4 sickness absence report for 2021 to 2022. And this is a report that comes to Cabinet every 6 months. I think the first thing to note within the report itself is that it is actually returned to pre-pandemic level. The levels of sickness experienced in the council have gone back to pre-pandemic levels. But I suppose that's not really surprising when we are now fairly well at business as usual at the same time as we still have COVID circulating in the population. So we actually have that to deal with at the same time. The overall picture is in paragraph 4.8. And if you want to look into, in terms of the sort of more in-depth information, have a look at section 4, which drills down into data both by service area, by length of absence, whether it's a short or long-term absence, and by cause. And it's not always straightforward. You know, obviously, as you might imagine, people that are doing heavy lifting or might suffer more from musculoskeletal type issues, people that are having to do face-to-face contact with lots of other people might get more viral illnesses, etc. But it's not always straightforward. And cabinet members will be discussing these figures in more depth and on an ongoing basis with their directors. But as we usually do, this report will be forwarded to scrutiny for an in-depth and cross-party review of the figures to see whether or not there's any specific consideration of anything, you know, particular that we need to do, or if there are any suggestions. I think it has to be said that most people will say that the support services, both in terms of reablement or in terms of employing support, have actually had a positive benefit or positive outcome for staff. So just fairly simply, 2 recommendations before us. That's that, firstly, that the report and the 12 months, that's April 2021 to March 2022, sickness absence figures provided in Appendix A be noted. And secondly, the report be referred to Corporate Performance and Resources Scrutiny Committee for consideration, with any comments referred back to Cabinet for further consideration. I'm not seeing any hands up, so I would therefore so move.
And I'll second that, Leader.
Thank you. Agenda item 6 is fairly straightforward. It's as a result of the change in administration that there are a number of outside bodies that we appoint individuals to. Quite a lot of them go along with cabinet responsibilities, so that you will see in Appendix A that a large number of the appointments are cabinet members for specific portfolios. And there are, so the details of all the appointments are at Appendix A, but there are a couple that I just need to mention. Firstly, looking at the, if I can just find it. Well, anyways, it's SACRA, the Standing Advisory Council on Religious Education. And on that, on page 4, the 3 appointees are councillors Julie Aviott, Nick Hodges and Eddie Williams. Now, we are able to have 6 appointees to that panel, so we will be contacting group leaders to see whether or not they would like to submit additional names to serve on that committee. And one slight glitch, we've in terms of the last item, which is the WJEC Board of Directors, it states Cabinet Member for Education, Arts and Welsh Language, but there's a typo. It says that is Councillor Bronwyn Books. It is not. In fact, it is Councillor Rhiannon Birch. So Councillor Birch will be the representative on the WJEC Board of Directors. So that's fairly straightforward. And I also just need to mention that historically, with under paragraph 2.3, it mentions Cardiff and Vale Community Health Council. There is a high level of commitment required within serving on that committee, and so it's essential that people have the appropriate capacity time-wise to be able to take that on. Sometimes people have found that quite difficult, so we are advised that the 3 members don't necessarily have to be members of this authority, and as long as at least one is. So the decision is, the nomination has been to appoint 2 members of this authority alongside a Penarth Town councillor, Councillor Richard Cox, who'd expressed an interest in becoming a member of that. So in terms of recommendations, the first recommendation for us today is that members be appointed or nominated to serve on the bodies listed under local government elections in 2027, as outlined in Appendix A, with those amendments. And 2, that where legally possible, attendance at meetings or of organisations to which a member has been nominated or appointed by the council be classed as an approved duty for which travelling and subsistence allowances are payable in accordance with the council scheme. And I therefore move. That's right, you did say that, Bron. I couldn't quite hear. I'm going to see if I can get my micro. That's it, that's better. So moving on to agenda item 7, this is discretionary cost of living scheme. This is slightly complicated because it actually talks about 2 different schemes. So I'm going to try and lay that out so that we understand both, because there's, you know, with the pressures that people are facing at the moment, I think a lot of people will be interested in this. And you know, not long after the annual meeting, we made comments that while we might have an ambitious agenda and that we want to work on, nothing at the moment is going to take over the cost of living pressures that are facing so many people in the community. So I'm pleased to bring this report today. So there are 2 government schemes in place to support residents at this time, when there is, as I said, such a squeeze on the cost of living. The first scheme is mandatory, and that's £150 to every resident in a Band D council property or below, or in receipt of council tax reduction. Interestingly, and from some comments I've heard, the council must make a physical payment. It's not permitted to credit residents' bank accounts against their council tax bill. So we actually have to make a payment to them. 34,000 residents in the Vale will benefit from this scheme, and 17,000 payments to those who pay by direct debit were made during the first week of May. Payments are also underway for the remaining 17,000, but it can be slightly more difficult to get in touch with those people if we don't hold bank details and things that we can make credits to. So the council is being supported by its payment provider, Bottom Line, and residents will receive a letter with a barcode that they scan to provide bank details to enable the payment to be made to them. And those letters are going out in the next week. So, you know, I would ask residents to keep an eye out for those if they think that they're eligible. We've set up a designated telephone line and are hoping also to have a counter service available for any customer who doesn't have access to a multimedia device, so who can't scan the code in and get immediate access. The URL on the letter will be unique to the person named on the letter, so the person on the telephone or counter can use that to take the person's bank details and submit it through Bottom Line once the customer's passed the relevant security checks. So in terms of that first scheme, that is underway. We've made half of the payments and we're working now on the others. And then there's also a discretionary scheme, which is the focus of this paper. The Vale's been awarded £825,000 from a national pool of 25 million to support those who have potentially fallen through the main scheme and those in greatest need in the county. The council has needed to balance a number of factors in designing this scheme. Obviously, identifying those in greatest need, targeting the money so that the sums awarded can make a difference, and ensuring that the scheme and the administration is as easy as possible, so that officers can get it to work speedily, particularly when we're managing quite a lot of different grant schemes and distributions at once. So we want it to work quickly and efficiently. There's been a cross-council group working on the scheme, and we've also been taking advice from Welsh Government on the priorities. It's estimated a total of 8,350 residents will benefit from the Vale's discretionary scheme. So there's 2 parts to it. Firstly, the scheme is going to award £150 to 1,600 residents who have arguably sort of slipped through the net on the mandatory scheme. And that would be those in homes of multiple occupation, including students, residents in social housing of Band E and above, and residents with a disability band reduction in Band E and above. The full details of how that sort of plays out are in Appendix 1 to the report. Secondly, there'll be effectively a supplementary payment of £82 to those 6,750 residents in greatest need. These residents will have received the £150 mandatory payment, £150 mandatory payment, or the equivalent from our discretionary scheme, as just mentioned. And these groups are households with restricted entitlement under the benefit cap, or the bedroom tax, or whatever is being called. Households receiving housing support, residents in receipt of domiciliary care or telecare, and households in receipt of free school meals. There's been much media coverage in the difficult choice that many are having to make between eating and heating. So the scheme will also provide £50,000 to food banks and food pantries in the Vale to make sure that they can continue their support. It is naturally very difficult to determine where to target the resources, and there's never going to be enough, but it's hoped that the payments will go some way towards easing the pressure, and it's an area that we'll continue to monitor. I spoke to the Minister for Finance and Local Government last night, and she actually asked for councils to suggest any further areas of support that would be helpful, and we will be making sure that we feed the views of the Vale through into that. I think the only other thing that's worth mentioning is that if in paragraph 2.23, it also lays out that, of course, we will be working with the various support agencies and signposting people to those to make sure that they are getting every piece of support that they're able to from other agencies as well. I think it's well known that there are so many benefits that are currently not being fully claimed, and we need to help people to get those in the current situation. So the three recommendations before us today are: one, that Cabinet is recommended to note the operation of the £150 cost of living scheme. Two, that Cabinet is recommended to agree the design of the discretionary cost of living scheme for the Vale of Glamorgan, set out in paragraphs 2.5 to 2.23. And finally, that Cabinet is recommended to delegate authority to the Director of Corporate Resources in consultation with the leader, Cabinet member for Performance and Resources, to make minor adjustments to the scheme to ensure that the full £825,000 grant allocation is fully distributed. And I would so move.
I'll second those recommendations, Leader.
Thank you, Bronwyn. Agenda item 8. This is a report in relation to the Microsoft Software License Proposal 2022 to 2025, and there is actually an associated Part 2 report on this agenda at item 15. In some ways, this is a fairly sort of technical report in terms of our digital provision in the council, and the council has a 3-year contract for the supply of Microsoft software, and that was awarded on the 1st of July 2021, and that contract required for it to be renewed on the 30th of June 2022. But it became possible in discussions on that in renewing the license, that we could renew via, and it's called the Microsoft software, via the E3 to E5 licensing ramp. And the ramp, as is explained in paragraph 1.2, the ramp is used by Microsoft to describe the move from one version of licenses to another with increased functionality. So due to timing of the upgrade decision, the Chief Executive's emergency powers were used to take advantage of the substantially discounted rate on offer. But this report is being brought to Cabinet for their endorsement. So the licensing upgrade will enable the council to continue to benefit from the Office 365 suite of productivity, collaboration and communication tools. But it's also going to allow the council full access to Microsoft's suite of security tools and extra functionality, including telephony, Power BI, and that's a really useful tool for data analysis and presentation, and auditing tools. And I think it's fair to say that previously we had a number of bolt-on tools that we could use, all of which actually cost more, and where you had interaction between our main provider and these add-ons, there was always opportunities or possibilities for glitches and for services to go down. And when, as most organisations are under constant attack from cybercrime, that to make sure that our services are as integrated as possible, so that we have a sort of a cohesive digital platform, was felt to be much more relevant. As I mentioned, the cost of individual elements doesn't represent value for money, whereas putting them together under one scheme does, and that's laid out in paragraph 1.10. And then going through in terms of the rationale, under key issues for consideration 2.1, it actually is talking about the significant differences between E3 and E5 licenses, and taking the E5 ramp or upgrade and the opportunities and benefits that offers. I'm just looking here. I'm just looking at this because as I said, under this part 1 report, the recommendations before us are to endorse the investment. So it's that Cabinet endorses the investment of the Council's ICT infrastructure as described in this report, and notes the use of Chief Executive's emergency powers relating to the upgrade from Microsoft E3 to E5, and that Cabinet notes this report and recommendations considered in connection with the Part 2 report later in the agenda. Obviously, the outcome of the Part 2 report will be recorded in the minutes, but in terms of the economic data, that will be in the Part 2 report. So I move those recommendations. Pardon, Bronwyn, I didn't quite hear that.
I'll second those, Leader.
Super, thank you. I said, and we can go into more detail in Part 2. And then finally, for me, agenda item 9 is another cost of living report, and this is relating to moving to the living wage, or the real living wage, and pay rates for grades 1 and 2 staff within the council. And as part of our commitment to supporting all of our staff, particularly during the cost of living crisis, a cross-functional group of officers has provided an integrated and collaborative review of the impact of the cost of living increase in the coming months, and consider how we can best support those most vulnerable in our communities, and also our internal staff across all directorates. And this report is as a result of that. It provides This report provides an overview of the Living Wage Foundation, and explains the requirements to become a Living Wage Foundation accredited employer. And that is our ultimate aim, is we will be working towards accreditation. So in terms of background, as I said, we've been working on the proposals to be considered by Cabinet today. And I think it's fair to say that alongside a desire to make sure that we become a living wage employer, and that's paying a minimum of £9.90 per hour to our employees, we also have to recognise the commitment of our staff, their dedication across some of our lowest pay grades, and the service that they provide to our citizens. They've been predominantly focused on delivering frontline services, and they've been key to the council's response during the pandemic. So as I said, it is something that we have long wanted to do, and I'm really pleased to be bringing that to them. The national minimum wage is currently £9.50, and that's statutory, and that's based on recommendations from the Low Pay Commission. And I said the real living wage is currently £9.90, and that is what we will be moving towards. The number of staff that will be affected by it actually is outlined in paragraph 2.7. And that is, about 470 staff at grade 1 and about 322 at grade 2 that will be moving up to £9.90, and the details of the types of occupations that they undertake is laid out there as well. There will obviously be financial implications to the council of this, and the details are outlined in the report, and it's considering an element of modelling on any projected overtime and agency pay staff. We're talking about 157,000 at 220 or 2021 pay scales. So recommendations in taking forward the move to becoming a real living wage employer is that Cabinet approves the proposal set out in this report for the council to adopt the living wage of £9.90 for our lowest pay grades, that's grade 1 and 2, who are currently paid £9.60 and £9.79 per hour respectively, with immediate effect. 2, that Cabinet approves the proposal for the council to commence the process of actively working towards the Living Wage Foundation accreditation. 3, that Cabinet receives a further report on the matters described in this report in due course in order to consider the implications of becoming an accredited living wage employer. And so we wanted to get this in place now, but we will be continuing our work on that. And so I am delighted to move those recommendations.
And I'll second those, Leader.
Thank you. Super, and that's my last one. So I shall hand over to Councillor Brooks with agenda item 10, which is Strong Communities Grant Fund.
Thank you, Leader. I'm delighted to bring this report in relation to the Strong Community Grant. And what the report will provide is Cabinet with an update on projects which were approved under the current Strong Communities Grant Programme, which is called the SEGF, short, the period since April 2020 until the end of March 2022. And then it also provides a summary of all the projects approved under the initial grant programme from April 2017 to March 2020. To just give a bit of background around this fund, Cabinet approved the establishment of the fund on the 3rd of April 2017. And the idea about introducing that was to streamline the way in which community grant funding is managed by the council, and also then to encourage innovative and creative use of a range of funding to support community initiatives, which would then be in line with the council's 2016-2020 corporate plan wellbeing outcomes, and also then in line with the Wellbeing of Future Generations Act 2015. So to set up to do this, we entered into partners with Waterloo Foundation, Natural Resources Wales, and also representatives of the town and community councils. And then they joined forces to support projects which really are making a difference to the quality of life and range of services available to people in our communities across the Vale. So Strong Communities Grants approved since the initial launch of the fund in March 2017 contribute towards the delivery of projects, and the overall value of that is in excess of £3.61 million, which I'm sure you agree is quite a significant sum of money. And then the scheme's also proven to be an invaluable tool in the allocation of Section 106 funding, and as well as then being used as match funding source for other funds from Welsh Government and lottery funding. So at the Cabinet meeting on the 23rd of March in 2020, Cabinet approved a second funding allocation that totalled £837,533, and that's for the 5-year period from April 2020 to March 2025. And the allocations of that funding are actually laid out in 2.2, and you can see the breakup there between revenue, capital, and then any reserve funding there as well. And then since it was launched then in 2017, grants totaling 1.154 million in excess of that have been awarded to 120 projects across the Vale. So then our long-term commitment to continue this support with the new 5-year allocation of the 837,000 until April 2025 also then coincided with the start of a period of unprecedented change for people living and working in the Vale, obviously with the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic. And in response to that, so I think what has been interesting is that how communities across the Vale have stepped up to those challenges that were presented, you know, and for everybody, these were unprecedented times, never experienced by any of us, thankfully. And they stepped up and then rapidly developed innovative and effective projects which support then some of our most vulnerable residents. So then in 2020, the allocation of 50,000 from this Strong Communities Grant Fund to a dedicated Vale Heroes Fund signals a tide of community action to address those urgent priorities triggered by the pandemic. And then those Strong Communities Grants then supported 23 Vale Heroes projects, which then range from provision of basic equipment for emerging COVID-19 support groups to funds for a small army of volunteers to sew much needed scrubs for care homes. And I think it's testament to our residents across the Vale how they stepped up there. Well, you know, in a situation that none of us had any experience around, but you know, I stand in awe of our residents, how they stood up to these times. And then through the grant scheme, funding of Wi-Fi enabled tablets for loan via libraries and support for local radio ensured that our communication channels remained open to those at most risk of isolation. And I think, you know, quite a few organisations recognise the potentially damaging effects of lockdown on children and young people, responded by using grant support to bring their services online. And I think it's only just now, as we're emerging from the pandemic, that we can actually see the impact that the pandemic had on so many people with social isolation, and I think a whole generation of our young people. So, you know, those works that were carried out definitely impacted in a positive way around that. And then obviously with the pandemic, a lot of community venues and activities were forced to close. So again, groups, they sort of reinvigorated themselves, and then they used this time to develop ambitious plans for growth. Several of these projects are now coming to fruition, and many focus on the important work of expanding the range of community services and activities on offer. And then in 2021, there's also sort of welcome move towards projects that address, either directly or indirectly, the climate and nature emergency. And again, this is in line with the Council's Project Zero commitment. So in Appendix A is the latest March 2022 progress report, and that lists the successful applications to the current fund since it was relaunched in April 2020. And that it's really interesting reading. It outlines each project and then also a snapshot of progress made by the end of March this year, bringing those projects to fruition. Then Appendix B, is a February 2020 progress report, and that summarises all the projects approved under the initial fund allocation for the period between August 2017 and March 2020. And obviously it outlines the state of play in February 2020, but also then a forward which highlights the further progress made by applicants between March 2020 and the end of March this year. And obviously that report was in progress of being made when the pandemic hit. And I mean, the vast majority of these projects have now been successfully completed. And I think it's a huge commendation to our residents, and also then to the officers who work so hard with the groups and actually really thought outside the box. Is how can we change things, but how can we still deliver for our residents? And I think if you do look through those appendices, then you will see that the variety of funding that was provided and how the groups thought about how they could benefit most of their communities. And I'm delighted there's actually across the length and breadth of the Vale. So I've only got one recommendation. I'm not sure if other members then want to comment on some of those projects within their areas, because I think there's so many there that they'd be fantastic to mention. So I'll just give the recommendation is that we note the content of this report and the appendices A and B, and then refer this report to Scrutiny Committee, which is the Environment and Regeneration, for their consideration as well. But obviously I welcome anybody then who'd like to put into the report as well. But
Thank you, Councillor Brooks. I'd just like to say what a wonderful read this report is. It's all the good news stories that all sorts of clubs, community halls, all groups have benefited from this money. And it just goes to show that amount of money can help so many people. And I think it's absolutely wonderful that what we have done over the last couple of years in benefiting all these groups. Thank you.
thank you, Gwyn. Liz, you were next.
Yeah, well, first of all, I'd be delighted to second the recommendation on this report, but also I think that exactly as Gwyn's just said, that the range of organisations and the projects that they have been working on and the things that they've been delivering is absolutely phenomenal. That quite often this money has been able to be the glue that brings various other parts of the initiative together, helps to make things work. The skills of our officers in capacity building within those organisations to help them to develop the skills to take their projects forward has also been great, and I'd like to thank those. And when you have a look, I can see here that Llandoch near Penarth is little tiny village, and there's work with the community council. There was with the village hall. I know there's a play area that they were able to get some sports funding, some other bits of funding, and we were able to top it up with a sort of an extra. I think we did about a third of it to make to make that happen. But then you can look at some other schemes that we've been involved in, and Ogmore Village Hall is a phenomenal venture that's been delivered, and all credit to the community there who have worked so hard. But I know that with funding from Strong Communities Fund plus support from council officers to help them get through some glitches, there's now a facility that any town would be proud of. So I think it's a superb report, and said all credit to everybody involved.
Yep, thank you very much, Deputy Leader. I would echo the points expressed by Councillor John and the leader here, because I do think, especially when people read Appendix A and the actual progress reports, you see the great plethora of organisations that we have in the Borough of Glamorgan and what they offer. And I'm really proud that this cabinet, along with previous cabinets, have really supported this funding, and I think hopefully we got this commitment long term as well, and I think that's a strength for confidence that we got in the communities, and I'll urge people to apply for grant funding. Thank you.
I think that's everybody who wanted to speak, so shall I think we've done the recommendations, been seconded, so shall I go into item 11, Leader?
If you could please, yes.
Sorry about that. So obviously item number 11 is myself as well, which is the award of contracts for supported local bus services. Now, this report is the first of two reports which relate to a tender process that was undertaken in order to award new term specified contracts, which supply them in a number of different supported local bus services, and those are the B3, 88, 89A and B, number 100, the 303, 304, 320 and the 321, and to award those to the successful bus operator. Now those bus services cover a number of different areas of Bailey, which include Penarth, Barry, Twit, Luce and Cambridge. And I think it is worth pointing out that these are much needed bus services, and actually the council then playing their part supporting those local bus services for our residents. So the contracts awarded require the endorsement of Cabinet in order that the supported bus contracts can be legally executed with the chosen bus operators. So this part 1 report contains the details of these contracts for public information. Now, the current total costs of the supported bus service is £976,293.32. That's funded from transport budgets. So further details relating to the individual tender costs are contained in the second part 2 report on this agenda. And obviously I'll be able to go into further details. Obviously those are the tender details there as well. So therefore, for this part 1 report, I would like to put down the following recommendation. Cabinet note the contents of the report in conjunction with the part 2 report to be later on in this agenda. I so move.
Thank you, and I think Councillor Williams wants to come in.
Thank you, Leader. It is firstly to I'm happy to second the report and motion. It's just the impact, isn't it, of a bus service that we need, particularly in a rural area. And I know from the previous years we've had some difficulties with some of the services, and we just can't do without. And the fact that the Vale are supporting it is not something I've really understood, that these companies that do these services are over and above what they're required to do, financially viable, and without this sort of granting for them, then we just wouldn't have them happening. So I'm really pleased to that this has come forward. Thank you.
Thank you. And yeah, I would definitely support that as well, Bronwyn, in terms of these are the types of bus services that are totally essential to people getting around and about and living their lives. So Gwyn, you wanted to come in on this one.
Yeah, thank you, Leader. I would just like to mention one particular service in the Western Vale, the 321, which goes from Lantred Major through to Cowbridge and on to Talbot Green. Now, first of all, it now allows people to catch this service to get to work at Llandau Business Park, which is a great support for people, particularly in these times with cost of fuel and travelling, getting to Llandau and maybe getting a lift before. This service, it drops them at the doorstep. And then, of course, it brings together always the close links of Lantred Major and Cowbridge and those people working in Cowbridge. But then, of course, this bus goes on to Talbot Green to link with a service that goes straight into Cardiff. So, I mean, this service has really come in to the Western Vale through the hard work of our officers. I know Emma Reid and I talked about this, and Kyle Phillips and the staff brought this together with the funding from the council, and which we were really grateful for. So this has brought together a lot of good news. Thank you.
Sorry, I was muted. Mark, you've got your hand up.
Yeah, thank you very much, Leader. I would like to echo these points that many members, as a couple of members have said. I think it's very important that these services are kept, and in fact, I think it's also very important of us as the council to promote these services as widely as possible, so that more and more people will use them, and in particular the ones that go to hospitals, in particular, notably the 89. And I think that is important that we do that. And of course, with the cost of living impact, it's going to be more vital that we maintain and strengthen our local bus services going forward.
Thank you. So you've moved it and you've got a seconder. So I'm assuming we're all in agreement.
Yep.
Thank you. And then moving on to, I've just moved over one extra one, agenda item 12. And this actually is comprehensive but very interesting report. Agenda item 12, the Childcare Sufficiency Assessment Draft Report 2022. Over to you, Rhiannon.
I start again. Thank you very much. So the Welsh Assembly required us to carry out a formal consultation, the Childcare Sufficiency Assessment. The purpose of the report is to advise members of the current position in relation to this draft. The statutory duties under sections 22, 26 and 27 of the Childcare Act 2006 require all local authorities to shape and support the development of childcare provision in the local area to make it flexible, sustainable and responsive to the needs of the community. So this CSA must measure the nature and extent of the current need and supply of childcare in an area. Through the analysis, the local authority will be able to identify gaps in local childcare provision and where parents' needs are not being met, which will allow the local authority to plan how to support the market to address the gaps identified. So the local authority must develop and include an action plan and response showing how they and their partners can reduce identified shortcomings in their area. And this will be under continuous review and updated annually. And it will require formal public and partner consultation for a minimum period of 6 weeks. The partners include the Public Service Board, childcare providers, childcare organisations, schools, West members, Flying Start, health partners and local authority partners. So that's the official stuff. But the report itself is very thorough and detailed, wide range of consultees, users, future users, providers, parents, etc., schools. Many comments offered on the experience of childcare, both during COVID and during more normal times, because obviously they varied considerably, as you all know. A discussion of the cost implications to childcare, how these are difficult to manage for many households, and I'm sure you will be aware from conversations with your own constituents, and in fact they may even be prohibitive, so that women find it difficult to return to work because childcare is good quality childcare is simply so expensive if you don't have family members who are able to pick up the slack for you. The report urges more provision of childcare facilities, but this doesn't lie specifically within our remit, so we will be encouraging and supporting it rather than providing it. So the private sector will obviously need to step up at this point. Another complicating factor here is the shortage of care workers. This is across the board in virtually all care settings. And this also applies to the childcare sector. And a further refinement of this is the shortage of childcare with Welsh language provision, which of course is in demand, but is even harder to find. So there's an action plan that's been drawn up, which has got 3 main points. So we are to provide advice, guidance and financial information to parents and carers returning to or remaining in employment and those seeking training opportunities. So the Vale of Glamorgan here, plus employability professional partners, should continue to work in partnership to address and monitor financial support for local parents and carers. Then the next one is the flexible childcare approach. The Vale of Glamorgan Council should continue to monitor the incidence of childcare providers' opening and closing times, along with opportunities for flexibility that accommodate Vale of Glamorgan families' working patterns, with a priority on early morning opening times at all childcare settings. And the last recommendation is for the action plan. The council should continue to take a lead on retention and recruitment, including of apprentices, to their local early years and childcare workforce. They should demonstrate to key partners, such as leaders at childcare providers, Cardiff and the Vale College, their commitment to a recruitment and retention drive. Leading on from that then, there are 3 recommendations: that the Cabinet notes the key findings and recommendations within the draft Childcare Sufficiency Assessment Report. The Cabinet notes the information and data collected and supports the action plan to address the gaps identified within the Childcare Sufficiency Assessment. And the Cabinet agrees to officers undertaking the statutory 6-week public and partnership consultation. I would like to ask for your support for those recommendations, please.
Thank you. I'm very happy to second those recommendations, and I would urge people to participate in the consultation, because it's only by having a full picture can we put a comprehensive plan together. How we will deliver that plan is something that we have to discover, but I'll work out. I was particularly interested in section 15 of the report, looking at barriers to childcare provision, and having talked, as most will have, to parents that are juggling childcare and needing to move children from nursery units in schools out to private providers, to family members and everything else. It must be hugely difficult to actually maintain a level of income through working alongside childcare. So if as many people as possible can input to this, that would be absolutely super. So I'm looking around, I can't see any hands up. Does that mean that everybody's in agreement?
Can I further make the point here that I think we should be looking at our constituents? I mean, the COVID pandemic showed us that many people working in healthcare settings rely heavily on family for childcare, because there is simply nobody else able to accommodate the hours that many of these people work, and obviously shift patterns as well. And also we could be looking or encouraging people to talk to us about the sufficiency of wraparound care provided by schools. I mean, Councillor Burnett has already talked about people moving between different types of care within the same day. And obviously there are some provisions that do that, pick children up from school, take them on to the next thing and so forth. But, you know, whether this is true, particularly in places like the rural Vale, where there is going to be far less supply of services to do that, and you're going to be relying on individuals. So I'd encourage people to go out to their constituents for more information. Yeah.
For interest, just after, when we finish this meeting, I will be heading off down to Llantwit Major and to the opening of an innovative scheme where Kilchmaithrin have got a wraparound provision which is attached to Ysgol Dewi Sant in Llantwit Major, so that children can attend the nursery unit in Llantwit Major in Ysgol Dewi Sant, and then go straight into wraparound care with Kilchmaithrin. And I'll be really interested to see how that works. And that was Welsh Government funding which we were able to facilitate, and in using the same same contractors that built the original school not that long ago, it actually now looks like a completely integrated facility. So it'd be really interesting to see how that works going forward, and whether or not there is a model there for the future. So thank you for that. I think I'll be attending scrutiny when that's discussed. Moving on to agenda item 13, and that is over to the Cabinet Member for Social Care and Health, and that's the annual Corporate Safeguarding Report 2021-2022. Thank you, Eddie.
Thank you, Leader. Yes, it's quite an interesting report for me, and just indicates the wide variety of people involved. I'll go through the executive summary then. This is a corporate responsibility to ensure that there are effective arrangements in place for safeguarding children and adults who require specific council services. This annual report, 2021-22, provides an overview of the corporate safeguarding activities which have been taking place across the local authority. You can see from the report the background. It's particular that most of the information is in Appendix 1, because that's the annual report, and it brings together safeguarding activity and taken not just by the social services but learning and schools, the managing director's office and resources, and environment and housing. And it's this holistic activity between the directorates across the council that ensures that we cover safeguarding in an appropriate way. In the report, it also notes that the scrutiny committees, they should really have a good look at this report and consider the elements on it in line with their portfolios areas. So I do hope that they do that. The Social Services and Wellbeing Wales Act 2014 was implemented in 2016, and this brought about changes in particular in relation to the introduction of a duty to report, which required a revision of the corporate safeguarding policy to bring staff's attention to this duty. And also the Working Together to Safeguard People guidance under Part 7 of the Act provides guidance on corporate safeguarding for the council, and guidance on handling individual cases, volumes 5 and 6, Protect Children and Adults at Risk, was launched in 2017. The guidance provides advice on what should happen if an individual has concerns about the well-being or welfare of a child or an adult at risk. Corporate safeguarding operates in conjunction with statutory required regional safeguarding board arrangements. And the point I'm making here is it's not just a council responsibility, but we do have partners with the regional safeguarding board. The corporate safeguarding group consists of officers from all the directorates of the council, and we work to ensure proactively that these safeguarding responsibilities are fulfilled. The main considerations in the report, they are set as national safeguarding procedures. Safeguarding procedures were launched in 2019, and these detail the essential roles and responsibilities. So it's clear the practitioners that they safeguard children and adults who are at risk of abuse and neglect, and they're standardising this practice, which is between all the agencies in Wales, quite an important feature. We've historically in the press in recent years, we talked about people falling between gaps, and this hopefully addresses that. The development of these procedures was led by the Vale of Glamorgan through the Cardiff and Vale Regional Safeguarding Board, and work to update and refine the procedures continues to be led by the social services officers in the Vale of Glamorgan. The task report highlights some growing areas of demand, as we understood with the COVID. It's a lot of challenges, wasn't it, with families and adults, and they're starting to come out in as we come out of COVID. But what we can see from the report is there are also some initiatives to improve our arrangements. We've got, for example, in the DBS checks, human resources. If you look at the schools aspects, there's been a slight drop in the compliance, would you say, when we first recruit, but that's partly down to the fact that we're recruiting higher numbers of teachers and the like, but nevertheless it's still a concern. But thankfully the introduction of an online DBS check online system on that portal will improve that, so that we'll have the majority of cases within 48 hours requirement that we've got, and notwithstanding we also have risk assessments done for staff that are employed. You'll also notice that in the report it talks about the Vale of Glamorgan Council adopted the Violence Against Women, Domestic Abuse and Sexual Violence Regional Strategy on July 2018, and we've got structures and accountability that are in place to ensure that we're able to deliver positive outcomes against the overarching objectives that have been agreed. And so hopefully you can see from the report there are several agencies and departments involved in that, and give some figures to the number of cases have increased, but what we can see is that we're able to deal with them, and certainly we're increasing the capacity of the staff to make sure that we can deal with the aspects of safeguarding. 1.4 mentions the pandemic, how it's impacted on us, and in the report I would suggest that the council have done a good job in maintain a high level of safeguarding. So from that, to come to the recommendations, I would like the Cabinet to note that the work that has been undertaken to improve corporate arrangements for safeguarding and protecting children and adults. 2, the Cabinet continues to receive the 6-monthly reports and work carried out to improve corporate safeguarding arrangements and the effectiveness of relevant policies, and that the report is referred to healthy living and social care, learning and culture, homes and safe communities, corporate performance and resource scrutiny committees for their consideration, and governance and audit committee to ensure continued oversight. I so move, Leader. Thank you.
Thank you, Eddie. And with the absence of any hands up, I'm very happy to second that report. That's super. So moving on to agenda item 14. Well, I don't have any items that are urgent to put before you today. So, but we do have 2 items for discussion on today's agenda under items 15 and 16, which follow on from the earlier reports on today's agenda. As these are matters that are considered to be confidential, the meeting will therefore need to move into private session where confidential matters can be discussed under part 2. So therefore I'll ask for Cabinet to agree to move to part 2 and ask the Cabinet Officer to stop the recording of this open session to ensure that no members of the public are present after this point, and only allow relevant parties to remain to hear the detail of the items to be discussed. Following the meeting, the outcome of the part 2 discussions will be formally captured as part of the minutes of the meeting and will advise all parties of the final decisions of the Cabinet for the relevant items. So therefore, can I formally move part 2? Is there somebody that would second?
I'll second that.
Happy to second as well. Yeah.
And therefore ask the Cabinet Officer to ensure only relevant parties remain from this point on, and for the live stream and recording to be stopped, please.